Hello everyone, a very warm welcome from Glasgow, Scotland. I am Claire McLaren and I work at the University of Strathclyde. We are very excited to have you with us today, and I have some brief logistical notes before we begin. The event is being run as a Zoom webinar, and the joining link you received is valid for the whole programme. We are recording the event and it will be made publicly available, and I will send you a link to this in due course. If you have any questions for the speakers, please submit these using the Q&A function. It is unlikely we'll have time to answer questions after each session. However, we will answer as many of these during the Q&A at the roundtable later today. For any questions we're unable to answer during the live Q&A, we will endeavour to follow these up post-event. As you can see, we have a very busy programme. Given this is an online event and there is no way to give presenters a visual clue that their time is nearly up, we will play a sound to alert them. I would now like to introduce you to your host for the COP26 preview event, Professor Allister Ferguson.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me, hear me. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Allister Ferguson, Professor of Photonics at the University of Strathclyde. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this COP26 preview event, Monitoring Urban Greenhouse Gases. Now, this event was originally planned for tomorrow, and it was planned as a real event here in Glasgow, but for reasons we all know, COP26 has had to be postponed, but we hope that you will join us next year for a similar event that we intend to hold next year. The event is being held under the auspices of GEMM Global Environmental Measurement and Monitoring, and this is an initiative supported by the Optical Society of America and the American Geophysical Union. So our opening session is a policy plenary, and our chair for the session will be Sir Jim McDonald. Now, Sir Jim is the Principal and Vice-Chancellor at the University of Strathclyde. He co-chairs with the First Minister of Scotland, the government's Energy Advisory Board, and he is the Chairman of the Independent Glasgow Economic Board. He holds several business appointments in organisations which include the Weir Group, ScottishPower, UK Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, the National Physical Laboratory. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Institution of Engineering and Technology, the Institute of Physics, and the Energy Institute, and is a Foreign Fellow of the Chinese Society of Electrical Engineers. He is currently President of the Royal Academy of Engineering, making him the most senior and influential engineer in the whole of the UK. Sir Jim, welcome.
Thank you very much, Allister, and it's a great pleasure to join you today, and indeed with such a distinguished and very well engaged audience through our speakers and to those that are simply tuning in today. So great to be here. And of course, we're addressing through this programme an incredibly important topic. We'll get some great programme elements for you to enjoy today and some outstanding speakers that I'm sure, like me, you're looking forward to hearing from. But of course, the context for our discussions today is absolutely clear. I mean, climate change is a global challenge, arguably an existential challenge, and data for that and the evidence for that's been around for decades. I'm happy to say that the vast majority of right-minded people these days embrace the fact that we have enough evidence for us to have no excuse at all to be acting in a concerted way to deal with this. And that, of course, means that we will only be successful in dealing with global warming and climate change through a concerted international collaboration. So the participation that we see in the speaker list today is a fantastic proxy for what we need to have in terms of putting together a global effort. Of course, the timing is excellent too. I mean, Allister has indicated, of course, we would have been at the original date for COP26 had we not been overtaken by COVID-19, but we look forward to it next year. And in many ways, I think we're demonstrating that without global collaboration, fundamental commitment to science and research and industrial engagement in dealing with public health, then we will not get out of the challenge that we currently face just now. With the good news we've had in the past 48 hours about the vaccine potential, it shows you that that international work, you know, the leadership, which is another important word in all of this, leadership and integrity, then we can get through this. And the same applies to climate change. So we're a year away from staging COP26. I'm genuinely excited about this as a son of Glasgow. I think it's a fantastic way to profile our city. And I think, as you'll hear from one or two of my fellow Scots, as well as our international partners, this is a great way for us to have a disproportionate impact on the debate and hopefully catalyse some great inputs that will take the international community forward. I also watch respectfully from a distance and without commenting on the politics. It's been a pleasure for me to hear Mr. Biden talk about how important climate change will be to him in a new administration, and that he is going to make that front and centre of his policy, as well as, of course, in the immediate term, dealing with the COVID-19 impacts. And our own Prime Minister in the UK, Mr. Boris Johnson, has already reached out to the President-elect to talk about climate change and net zero being a key platform for collaboration between the United Kingdom and the United States. For me, enormously encouraging, because it's worthwhile noting, coming to my own country and our own nation, that the UK has legislated. It's one of the few large countries that have legislated for net zero by 2050. That's important. That puts real skin in the game in terms of the government's unambiguous commitment to decarbonising and moving towards a net zero economy, as well as dealing with climate change. To their credit, our Scottish Government, because of the infrastructure, the opportunities, the energy systems that we have laid out their plans for net zero by 2045. And you'll hear from our excellent leader of the City of Glasgow, Susan Aitken, shortly about the ambitious targets for our city on 2030, exactly the sort of stretch target that only leadership can provide, and then leadership lighting a beacon so that researchers, investors, industry and business can gather around that to make these targets a reality. Earlier this year, as many of you know, the Prime Minister recommitted to the net zero targets that had been talked about so much. I had the privilege of sitting in the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. We wrote a substantial report for him in January this year, which was submitted in the form of a letter with recommendations, and then a detailed set of analyses that sat behind it, which he enthusiastically and publicly welcomed. And that's wonderful, because it simply doubles down on the public commitment. But very importantly now, we're now moving towards the sorts of low regrets and ideally no regrets investments that are going to be required to create a low carbon infrastructure, renewable source investments, electrification of transport, for example, and decarbonisation of the built environment, and many other aspects. And of course, we need to continue to work with citizens, because their behaviours and their engagement and their approvals and participation in these new spaces that we'll create and these new policies that will drive forward will be absolutely key. And cities are essential, and you'll hear about that from one or two of our speakers at the first session. We're moving towards, in the next few decades, 80% of the world's population being in an urban environment, with the same percentage again in terms of greenhouse gas contributions from cities. So we really need to think about what that means in terms of how we traverse, how we work in, how we live in large urban conurbations, as well as what this means for rural communities. So that is why measurement and monitoring is so key. We have to derive data. We need to inform policymakers. We need to make this real for those that not only make decisions at the city level, but regionally and nationally. And we have a fundamental responsibility to inform our citizens about what's going on around them and letting them see the impacts of good policy, good investments, and very importantly, because I'm a great fan of someone that many of you will know, Lord Nick Stern, who I was talking about this at the weekend. Nick's proposal around creating, tackling climate change, creating opportunities and building economy for the 21st century. So we need to drive these data sets. That's why the Global Environmental Measurement and Monitoring Network is so important. Data, evidence, a platform for the introduction of new science and technology, and bringing the community forward so we can measure the effectiveness of our interventions and create opportunities to deal with things properly and at the right pace. My strong congratulations to two friends who are on this call, Tom Baer and Allister Ferguson. I think the work that was set up in the conference in 2008 and 18 through the Optical Society to bring the power of measurement, whether it's photonics or other technologies, new sensor configurations, is absolutely key. And in many ways, GEMM, our workshop today, is the nexus between science and engineering, meeting policy, society, and economy. That's an exciting space to be. Very often we silo these different activities, but around climate change, global warming, it's essential that we deal with this. And my own institution, it's a real commitment in our strategic plan. We expect to drive out around 70% of our own CO2 emissions by 2030. And we're making commitments to our education and our research programs, through our Institute for Energy and Environment, our Centre for Energy Policy, a recently opened Centre for Sustainable Development. We have around 300 PhD students working in this related area and over 100 academics, so a real army of great talent. So, without any further ado, it's a great pleasure for me to be convening the first session. We are blessed to have a fantastic array of talent, and I will now move to introduce our first speaker for today with a slight arrangement in the running order. And it's my pleasure, first of all, to introduce and welcome to the digital environment, David Miller. David is the Director of International Diplomacy, and he is Global Ambassador of Inclusive Climate Action at the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. He is responsible for supporting mayors in their climate leadership, for building a global movement for socially equitable action to mitigate and adapt to climate change. I first met David. It was my pleasure to meet him when he was mayor of Toronto from 2003 and 2010. And under his leadership, Toronto became widely admired and acclaimed internationally for its environmental leadership, its economic strength, and social integration. David, it's great to have you here, and I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thank you to you for your leadership, to Councillor Aitken, leader of council, for her leadership, and to the City of Glasgow, really for bringing us all together. I'll speak fairly briefly today about C40 and its mission, and about how GEMM, from our perspective, can help achieve some really significant global goals on equity, climate, and air quality. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the work of the City of Glasgow, the Scottish Government, and the Government of the United Kingdom on climate, and the opportunity we have between today and COP26 next year to really significantly advance climate action. Our work at C40, we're a climate-driven organization, as people probably know. Roughly speaking, we're in 96 of the world's largest cities, and work closely with some other cities, including Glasgow, on relevant action. C40 members have agreed that by the end of this year, by the end of 2020, they will all have climate plans that reduce their emissions sufficiently to deliver a fair share of a global 50% emission reduction by 2030, and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 as required by science. And a significant number of already peaked emissions, which is required for developed cities scientifically by the end of this year. But it also means that these cities and their governments and their leaders of council and their mayors are in need of developed technologies in order to attract efficiently, effectively, and economically these emissions. In addition to that work on climate, because of the COVID crisis this year, C40 mayors have come together and formed a mayor's task force on a green and just recovery. They've issued state-of-the-art research on specific recovery measures that focus on creating green jobs, investing in crucial public services, protecting mass transit, supporting essential workers, and giving back public space to people and nature. The latest report, for example, which was published on October 28th, contains extensive research that shows a green recovery globally could create 50 million jobs, help 128,000 people avoid premature death because of improved air quality. And it also grimly shows that if there isn't a green and just stimulus, it will be very difficult indeed for the world to keep global heating to 1.5 degrees. At the heart of our work, our cities and their mayors have recognized that equity is inextricably linked with climate change, and we've certainly seen that in the impacts of COVID. So our agenda on both recovery and climate is to address the inequity of climate change and work towards greater climate justice by creating inclusive climate action. So our member cities are concerned with achieving more equitable results from their action on climate change. So their plans include equity in our program. And from our experience and the experience of our cities, it's extremely challenging to get access to the data needed and the metrics on a local scale to measure pollution, carbon and other, and to work but on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. And so for us, as an organization that represents city regions of approximately 700 million people and about 25% of the world's economy, it will be very difficult to achieve a significant impact on airborne pollution, both if we don't have the right policies, so a green stimulus, and the right data. And the research and technology used by the GEMM initiative is a perfect example of accessible, just data that allows for an accessible, just, and green recovery. And one of the points I wanted to make is that there's a long history of local communities mobilizing around air quality issues to address threats across the world, but particularly in North America and Europe, but with significant potential in other countries. But people cannot mobilize to address air pollution threats, including climate change, if they don't know the facts. So GEMM is extremely important to city governments and their partners, to national governments and their partners, I think to businesses, labor, and others, but also to local communities so they can know their environmental challenges and address them through political mobilization. The final point I wanted to make was that yesterday, together with the Global Covenant of Mayors, in the context of the Race to Zero launched by the climate champions in the run-up to COP next year, we've launched a campaign to recruit 1,000 cities to have climate plans in line with these 2030 and 2050 targets, in line with science, by COP26 next year. And that action can only be confidently undertaken if the relevant governments have the data they need to take the right actions in sectors like buildings, transport, clean energy, and how we manage waste. All of which are areas where significant actions can happen today that get us on a 1.5 degree trajectory. But city governments and national governments can't act with confidence without the data. And that's why we're very delighted to see the GEMM initiative and the work underway to help provide local communities and city governments with granular neighborhood scale data to help them address climate change and air quality and public health issues. I look forward to the conversation, not just today, but the ongoing conversation and work so that we can help build this collaborative to a far broader scale. Jim, again, thanks so much for the welcome here to Glasgow. I have a long relationship with Glasgow and the cities and its government are always very good to me. And it's much appreciated the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for setting the scene so well in terms of that leadership piece around that, that confederation, as it were, of city mayors. Exciting, but it's great that we can engage you with the GEMM programme too. So, colleagues, with that, it's my pleasure now to have us set up a video message from our Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, and that's Mr. Paul Wheelhouse. Paul was appointed Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands in June 2018. He served prior to that as Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Minister for Community Safety and Legal Affairs, and Minister for Business, Innovation and Energy. Unfortunately, and you'll understand why this is in terms of the pressure of our national leaders, unable to join us today, but I'm delighted to say that Mr. Wheelhouse prepared some pre-recorded remarks that we'll share with you now. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm delighted to be addressing you today. After the opening remarks by Professor Sir Jim McDonald, I'd have liked to be able to say welcome to Scotland, since the original intention was to hold this event during COP26 in Glasgow. Unfortunately, as the world continues to grapple with COVID-19, as this has been postponed for a year and we find ourselves watching on screens in different time zones, and I'm of course addressing you from my office in the Scottish Parliament. Instead, I hope that global progress against the virus means we can still welcome COP26 to Glasgow in November next year and showcase the climate action and international cooperation I'm going to talk about today. Now, I was honoured 2 years ago while visiting San Francisco for the Global Climate Action Summit hosted by the then Governor, Jerry Brown, to be offered the opportunity to speak at the inaugural meeting of the GEMM initiative in Stanford and to learn about the vital work you were doing. This, as some of you may recall, followed the First Minister's visit to Stanford in 2017 to launch the Memorandum of Understanding between the Scottish Government and the Government of California. That MOU was signed in the context of the Under 2 Memorandum of Understanding between a wide range of cities, states and regions around the world, which I will say something about in a moment. The agreement between Scotland and California, though, committed both governments, amongst other things, to, and I quote, influence higher global ambition on climate change, and, again I quote, to raise international attention to the actions and ambitious reduction goals of climate leaders at a subnational level around the globe, including at key upcoming international climate and energy conferences and summits, unquote. Now, Scotland has made clear our commitment to the Paris Agreement by being one of the first countries to declare a climate emergency, and through our ambitious climate change greenhouse gas emission reduction targets Scotland Act, which we passed in September last year. Under this Act, we now have what is arguably the most ambitious legal framework for emissions reductions in the world, with a commitment to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045, 5 years ahead of the UK, and a very challenging statutory interim target as well to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. This, of course, is underpinned by a commitment to a just transition where we share in the benefits of decarbonisation and where no one is left behind. This legal commitment by the Scottish Parliament clearly demonstrates how non-party stakeholders can lead from the front and make a real difference in global efforts to tackle climate change. We're now working on a policy package that matches these targets, and the Climate Change Plan update, to be published in December, will articulate our pathway to 2032, tackle biodiversity loss, and in response to the events of this year, will be a strategic document that sets out our plans for a green recovery from COVID-19. That recovery being a recovery in which we amplify the benefits of a transition to net zero, including by developing sustainable skills, creating green jobs and nurturing innovation and growth. This is an approach which is of fundamental importance to the future well-being of people and our planet. As we continue to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant social and economic crises, the energy sector will play a key role in building a greener, fairer and more equal society and economy. Now, Scotland's energy strategy, which I launched in December 2017, recognises the importance of working with international partners to better understand the transition to a net zero economy and commits the Scottish Government to support internationalisation efforts in relation to energy. We will continue to develop and strengthen our international relationships, prioritising activity and collaborations that promote learning and policy exchange, build upon Scotland's reputation and increase our attractiveness to international partners and lead to longer term investment and export opportunities. As the Scottish Government continues to move forward with our net zero ambitions, we remain guided by the three core principles set out in our energy strategy. Those principles are a whole system view, an inclusive energy transition and a smarter local energy model. Early next year, we will demonstrate how they underpin the programme of work we are delivering with the publication of our Energy Policy Position Statement, with a view to updating the energy strategy itself in 2021 if we're re-elected in next May's Scottish Parliament elections. The statement will coherently set out how our policy actions across the energy sector collectively support the Scottish Government's efforts to ensure a green economic recovery and remain aligned to our net zero ambitions. It will also include reference to our most recent offshore wind policy statement, which we published just last week and which sets a new ambition of up to 11 gigawatts of offshore wind in Scotland by 2030, enough to power over 8 million homes. Now, the sharper-eyed amongst you will realise Scotland has in the region of 2.6 million buildings and homes. So this scale of increased ambition is about growing our renewable electricity supply to enable the wider decarbonisation of transport, heating and industry. We have, in 2019, seen 90% of Scotland's electricity demand being met from renewable sources. But of course, our demand for electricity constitutes just 21% of the energy we consume. So you can get a picture for how much more expansion we need to make in offshore wind to meet our aspirations around decarbonisation. Our green recovery has already begun. We have invested in transitioning the oil industry and in nature-based solutions, in decarbonising our buildings, and in retraining for green jobs, all as part of our transition to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Now, of course, our commitment to a just transition to net zero is extremely ambitious and is not something we can achieve alone. As well as the important Memorandum of Understanding with California that I mentioned earlier, Scotland remains a strong believer in international cooperation, for example through our role as the European co-chair of the Under 2 Coalition, a group of more than 220 governments representing over 1.3 billion people around the world and 43% of the global economy. To achieve our ambitious targets, we recognise the need to work in partnership with like-minded partners across the world, nurturing inclusivity and amplifying the voices of those not already heard. To date, Scotland's active membership of the Under 2 Coalition has included participation in the Industry Transition Platform, a peer learning forum which supports participating governments to develop effective strategies to cut emissions from energy-intensive industries, providing funding for the Future Fund, which fosters peer-to-peer learning through secondments between developing and developed nations that are members of the Under 2 Coalition, and taking a leading role in the ZEV community, a platform for international, intergovernmental peer learning on zero-emission vehicles. At this year's Under 2 Coalition General Assembly, our call for international solidarity was echoed by our fellow co-chairs, California, KwaZulu-Natal and Querétaro, and we're looking forward to continuing in this spirit over the next 2 years. This is especially true as we approach COP26, where I hope we will see strong city, state and regional representation. Now, COP26 is now a little over 350 days away, and I hope that my remarks have given you a feeling of what we in Scotland are doing in response to the global climate emergency, both here and with international partners. The Scottish Government is developing a programme of activities and events to take place before, during and after COP26 next year. COP26 must provide the opportunity to highlight the leadership that subnational governments offer in addressing the climate crisis, and we encourage subnational governments and other actors to look to Glasgow with even greater ambition and set out concrete strategies to fight climate change in a way that is both fair and just. Many thanks, or Moran Tang, as we say in Scots Gaelic. Thank you very much.
And many thanks to Minister Wheelhouse, and I'm sure we'll be passing those thanks on directly to him for his participation. It's next my genuine pleasure and delight to have Mary Nichols join us. Mary, very welcome to the event. I was going to say welcome to Glasgow, but you're in the virtual world with us. But thank you very much for joining us. And by way of introduction, Mary is the chair of the California Air Resources Board, where she occupies the attorney seat. And she serves on the board under Governor Gavin Newsom. And over a career as an environmental lawyer spanning over 45 years, Mary has played a key role in California and the nation's progress towards healthy air. She has also led the board in crafting California's internationally recognised climate action plan. Mary, it's a genuine delight to have you here, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I wish I were able to be with you in person as well. I have to say that when I accepted the invitation to join you this morning, I didn't know whether I would be speaking in defiance of another 4 years of the United States as a global outlier, or whether I'd be in a position to speak with the support of the country behind California and what we're doing. And I'm just so happy to be able to say that we are already beginning to have discussions about how quickly we can move to bring the federal government back into full partnership and support of climate action, and beyond that, really how we can implement a very ambitious and determined platform that President-elect, I'm happy to say, Joe Biden put forth during his campaign. So it's really a pleasure to be able to talk to you this morning about what comes next. And I think it's especially poignant or exciting, depending on how you look at it, that we're talking about the role of cities, because while the United States for 4 years was in absentia from international bodies, and the leadership that we had hoped for from our national government was not happening, there were tremendous activities going on at the state and local level. And I think that from the old sort of paradigm of policy and ideas flowing from the center and out into the provinces and then down to the villages, we really have seen a reversal in the past 4 years of where the energy is coming from. And in this recent campaign, even the fact that climate has been one of the top issue areas for all people, but especially for young people, gives us a tremendous amount of hope and enthusiasm for working with local governments to develop strategies that they're going to be able to implement. So the agency that I'm in charge of, California Resources Board, is the climate and air quality regulator for our state, which is, even in the midst of worldwide recession, still the 5th largest economy in the world. And we have been charged with developing the plans for how to achieve California's ambitious climate goals, which parallel those of a number of other jurisdictions now, of getting to net neutrality on climate by 2045. So no net emissions by 2045. And along the way, we're required to cut our emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And we also are operating under a mandate to phase out internal combustion transport by 2045, actually for light duty by 2035. So these efforts, again, are highly integrated with the role that cities are playing as the lead entities for the built environment and for the transportation sector. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But many cities in California for years have had climate plans of their own, which they have, in some cases, had to struggle to implement because of lack of support, both financial and also of lack of real appreciation for the role that they can play in developing actionable plans for reducing driving and for helping to facilitate a transition that is economically stimulating and also a just transition. At the bottom of all of this, as your earlier speakers have identified, is the data. It's the level of information that people, neighborhoods and city councils and mayors have at their disposal to really develop strategies that can work, and to be able to make the case to those who may be doubtful or resisting any of the transitions that are underway already, to understand and to participate in helping to make the transition one that is actually economically beneficial. And we've seen time and time again that emissions monitoring is at the bottom of the bedrock, really, of everything that we do. When we first began at the state level to act on climate in a formal legal way, we had at our disposal over a decade worth of data about the major sources of pollution in our state. That is the 700 or so largest industrial emitters, and also generations of good modeling and monitoring information about emissions from the transportation sector, because they're so integrally linked with fuel use. But since that time, we have been trying, with some success, I think, that we can build on to improve the accuracy, the precision, the geographical understanding, and the relationship between emissions data and ambient data throughout the state, so that we can measure greenhouse gases in ways that actually help us to devise cost-effective strategies. And this, in turn, obviously has been built on investments in much more accurate and timely tools for creating the data and for analyzing it on a close to real-time basis. New technologies that have come into use and that allow us for better identification and quantification of our methane in particular at the ground, to pinpoint the role of oil fields, landfills, natural gas pipelines and compressor stations. All of these things are essential to developing really effective regulatory programs and figuring out where to target enforcement activities when you have regulations in place. And it also is very helpful in making the connection between greenhouse gas sources and the pollutants that affect the health of people in both cities and rural communities. So the fact that the same sources of greenhouse gas emissions are contributing to the pollution burden is a fact that sometimes I think is obscured because we focus on the two issues often separately and talk about them separately. So I think that I am going to just highlight one more thing that relates to the relationship between local air pollution and greenhouse gases. And that is to say that since I've last been with many of you, at least, we've been working really hard on something called AB 617, which is the Community Air Protection Program, which really reverses the way that we do planning and strategic development for air quality and brings in both localized air toxics and greenhouse gases in the discussion with community groups in some of our most disadvantaged communities. So I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about that more at a later point. I'm available to talk to you offline in any event if you'd like, through any of our various coalition activities. And I just want to wish everyone continued success with this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. And I wish we had another half an hour to give you. And may I congratulate you on your fantastic impacts and your personal leadership in flying the flag. And I say I must not comment on other countries' politics, but we share, or I should only say myself, I share your joy in a changing environment around you. But with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce another highly impactful city leader, and my pleasure to work closely with Susan Aitken. Susan is leader of the City of Glasgow Council. She became leader when the SNP became the largest party in the council, forming a minority administration in May 2017, but that has been no constraint on Susan's energy and impact and vision for the city, both in terms of the environment, economy, and most importantly, the well-being of their citizens. And before being elected, Susan worked in a variety of policy and research roles in other Scottish parliamentary activity and the third sector. Susan, it's great to see you, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's a pleasure as always, and a real pleasure to see so many friends and partners of Glasgow taking part in today's event. It's a real testament to the spirit of collaboration and partnership that the city is undertaking many of the our projects and many of the tasks that we have in hand, but this one in particular, perhaps, and I'll say a wee bit more about that. Again, I'd like to say welcome to Glasgow. I know many of you are not actually physically in Glasgow, but let's say that while this event isn't in Glasgow, it is of Glasgow. And very much in the Glasgow spirit. So I will say welcome to Glasgow anyway, even if you're not physically here. I have no compunction on commenting on other countries' politics, and I'm absolutely delighted with the result of last week's presidential election. But I think for Mary, and I was really interested in what she was saying. People like her have been working under incredibly difficult circumstances for the past 4 years in the United States, but keeping that climate action alive and the sense of urgency alive in states and in cities, and that mobilization, that movement at state and city level in the USA has been incredibly important to that wider movement of cities, which David, of course, was talking about from the leadership of C40, which Glasgow is delighted to be part of. That sense that it will be cities, often in subnational governments, like Scotland indeed, who will actually deliver the actions that national governments and states promise. So there's been a real momentum, I think, on the road to COP this past week, with the coinciding of it being a year to go and this promise now of a return of the United States to the international community when it comes to a commitment to climate action, and a return to being committed to the Paris Agreement. And the milestone of a year to go, which we're still in, and I suppose in exactly a year's time, we'll be building up to the climax of those negotiations. Well, we'll be just a couple of days till the end of COP26 in November 2021, and I would imagine we'll be right at the point of excitement and anticipation and pressure on those states being at absolute fever pitch, but it absolutely reminds us of the urgency of the climate emergency, but also here in Glasgow what COP and what the privilege of being the host for COP26 means for our transition to carbon neutrality by 2030. What we as a city and our citizens can expect from COP, but also what we can give back to the world as the host city. And that's a responsibility that we take very seriously in Glasgow. As we continue to drive forward, though, I want to take a moment just to look back just a wee bit. When I became council leader 3.5 years ago, from the outset, the city government was determined to grasp the issue of reducing emissions and improving air quality. Levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter from traffic at several locations in Glasgow, and not just our high-profile city centre hotspots like Hope Street, but in other parts of the city as well, they were absolutely chronic. And poor air quality was, and indeed still remains, a real barrier to growth as well as a clear social justice issue. We know that hundreds of deaths in Glasgow a year are attributable to air pollution, and this disproportionately affects people living in the most disadvantaged communities. So from the outset, our policies have set out to confront and to reverse that. So far, we've delivered phase 1 of Scotland's first low emission zone, a significant milestone towards a cleaner, healthier and more breathable Glasgow. And we appointed an expert connectivity commission to help plot a sustainable and inclusive way forward for how the city and the wider region moves around and connects with each other, with jobs, with economic opportunities, with cultural opportunities, and how that contributes to our emissions total as well. We've also committed to pushing forward with the Avenues project, which is transforming our historic primarily Victorian city centre and to transforming George Square from what was a congestion choked island, really, to the civic space that Glasgow deserves. And more generally, we've made clear that our direction of travel is one that addresses the over-reliance on private car use to prepare for the Glasgow of tomorrow and improve the health of our citizens today. A change can be slow, of course, and culture's ingrained, but by leading, the city government has made considerable progress, and we do now have cross-party consensus in the city chambers on the need for real and unprecedented action to tackle emissions and congestion and the impact that they have. And the approach is producing positive results already. Just last month, we were able to revoke the Parkhead Cross air quality management area after several years of it meeting its pollution targets. And we also see targets beginning to be being met in the west end of the city, leaving now only parts of the city centre remaining above our emissions targets levels. But even there, we're seeing the early positive impact of Glasgow's low emission zone. Something I'm determined that we do as we make our transition to carbon neutrality by 2030 in Glasgow is to make it not only relevant to the lives of ordinary Glaswegians, but also something that they see as improving their lives and their experience of living in the city, their experience of Glasgow. So I'm really pleased and proud of our work around city primary schools. And just last month, we launched the second wave of our car-free zones around a further 20 primary schools in the city, and evidence from phase 1 has already pointed to an almost 70% reduction in traffic outside the schools that we've targeted so far. We've encouraging walking and cycling, and we're sparing children the emissions that congestion generated outside of those schools, as well as improving safety for those children and indeed all of the people who live in that area. Many of our schools in Glasgow, our primary schools in particular, sit right in the middle of densely populated, built up urban areas. So those car-free zones have a wider impact for local residents, but most importantly for the children and young people attending those schools. But helping us to take that work to the next stage is this hugely exciting GEMM project. For the first time, thanks to a network of 25 sensors installed across our schools by the University of Strathclyde, by scientists working there, the City Council is going to be able to monitor real-time information on greenhouse gas emissions. And that network of sensors will provide us with a detailed picture of where carbon emissions are produced at source, as well as tracking levels of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and particle matter. And what that real-time information will allow us to do is make better informed policy decisions, to see the near immediate impact of those decisions and to help measure progress against the city's target to be carbon neutral by 2030. Data on carbon dioxide levels in the city have been largely based on historic consumption of fuels for traffic and domestic heat and so on. And that's only made available by the UK government 2 years in arrears. And working with 2-year-old data is just not conducive to the urgency of the climate challenge that we face. We're going to face an ever-increasing need for more accurate environmental data, improved measurements and forecasting models so that we can better develop the strategies and policies that we need to adapt to or mitigate the impacts of climate change. And GEMS will be at the absolute vanguard of that, how we use that environmental data in shaping a sustainable future Glasgow. So, to conclude, we will continue to monitor the project's progress. We expect that by the time COP is upon us next November, we can fully demonstrate the effectiveness of the Glasgow network, of the impact of GEMS and the benefits to our people, but also to show that the role of GEMS in reducing greenhouse gas emissions will be a model not just for Glasgow but for every city on the planet. It's very exciting, and I'm delighted that we are able to be part of this project. Thanks very much.
Susan, thank you very much indeed. Just when you get a list like that, you realise how much is going on in the city and the drive behind it. So thank you for sharing with us all of what's going on. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our penultimate speaker, another well-kent face, as we say in Glasgow, around the policy piece, and that's Professor Greg Clark. And Greg has many affiliations and many routes to impact. He's Global Head of Future Cities and New Industries at HSBC Group. He's also, in the recent past, become Chair of the Connected Places Catapult, the UK's National Agency for Innovation in Cities and Transport. He was the founder of the Business of Cities and many other things, including his academic connectivity. He's an honorary professor at UCL, and I'm delighted to say a visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde. Professor Clark, over to you.
Jim, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. My greetings to Susan and my congratulations to both of you and your partners on this really exciting initiative. Brevity is the soul of wit, Jim, so I'm going to be mercifully short, simply to say that HSBC Group 2 weeks ago announced up to $1 trillion for climate change action and 100 million for new technologies in the green space, and a commitment to net zero by 2050 with a big acceleration in the next 10 years. The Connected Places Catapult, who I'm representing today, is already working in partnership with Glasgow City Council in combination with the Energy Systems Catapult that you know very well, to try to spur the development of the ambitious program that Susan's outlined. We're living in a very interesting time, Jim, the 5th decade of the century of the cities, where the puzzle is to combine rapid urbanization with new technologies and innovation processes to deliver net zero outcomes. And the Catapult's work focuses on the innovation side of that piece. So as well as working alongside Glasgow in the net zero strategic plan that Susan spoke about, we're working with cities in Africa on their waste management and the environmental and air quality consequences of that. We're working with low emission zones in cities all over the world. And due to COVID-19, we're taking a particular interest, Jim, in how digitization is having an impact on urban logistics and the amount of transportation that's happening in our cities to deliver online purchases and everything else. If you like, how do we decarbonize the last mile of the urban logistics system in cities? This is very interesting because COVID-19, as everybody here in the conference knows, is an accelerator of some trends. It's a disruptor of others. But if it doesn't work, as David Miller insisted it should at the beginning, to decarbonize our systems, as it were, to connect human health and planetary health, we will have missed the big opportunity of our time. So with rapid digitization, we've been able to prove, I think, through the various lockdown processes that have happened around the world, that it is possible to decouple productivity from carbon emissions. And what we need to prove now is that the new digitized as a service economy that delivers everything to our door can also be decarbonized. So for this reason, the GEMS project is spectacularly important. We're also working with our colleagues in the Satellite Systems Catapult, thinking about how satellites can play a role in helping to monitor air quality. And we're working with a variety of cities in both India and Africa to try to help them develop air quality monitoring from scratch, particularly in relation to buildings, to factories, to transportation, and to waste management. And as David, I think, said earlier on, waste and the relationship between waste and poor air quality is something we don't talk about so much within the OECD countries, but is an absolutely critical issue around the world. So having said that, let me just say we really support what you're doing here today. It's wonderful to be here to contribute to the launch of this work, Jim. And if the Catapult can be of any service to you, we look forward to really building the partnership more broadly. And I'm also very keen to see HSBC become more active in supporting some of the wonderful technologies that are being developed here. And the bank is ready to engage on that conversation as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I have no doubt that Allister, Tom and the team will follow up with you post this event. Thank you for such an uplifting presentation. And last but not least is our final presenter, Keith Anderson. Keith is undoubtedly one of the UK leaders in the energy sector, not only from a business perspective, which is his day job, but he engages regularly and very effectively in policy influencing and supporting government in their targets for net zero. I mentioned he's Chief Executive of ScottishPower, and he also sits on the ScottishPower board, where he was appointed in February 2012. He has full responsibility for the company's activities in the UK, and that covers everything from energy networks through to renewables, all the way through to retail, the energy services and the customer interface. Keith, thank you very much for being with us today, and the final session is yours. Thank you.
Hi, look, thanks, Jim, and thanks to everyone. It's been great listening to the insights of the other speakers. So hopefully I can add a little bit to it as well. It's a year until COP. I think that's been mentioned already, and I think the importance in that is that everybody's mindset should now be shifting, focusing on that countdown. And focusing on what each of us can do as individuals, companies, communities, to make sure that COP26 ends up creating a lasting legacy. In many ways, the eyes of the world will be on Glasgow. And I think actually in some ways the fact that the COP has been delayed has increased the expectations, because in that interim period we're hopefully starting to see a result in terms of a vaccine, which was mentioned already, but also the election of President Biden in the US as well. And I think, I've even noticed watching the media and commentary over the last 4 or 5 days, the expectation levels around COP26 are reaching an all-time high. And it's our job and our duty as citizens of Glasgow, Scotland, as business people, as stakeholders, to make sure that we live up to and deliver against those expectations. And so it's a big task in front of all of us. There is a real opportunity for the Glasgow Agreement to outstrip and become the new Paris. Everybody keeps referring back to Paris and the benchmark of Paris 2015. And I think now Glasgow is in place to supersede that and to create the next benchmark and the next level of delivery. And I think that would be a fantastic outcome, not just for the city, but for the whole of Scotland and the whole of the UK, in showing what innovation we've brought forward, in showing the way we've tackled decarbonisation, and showing the way that we're on the path to net zero. At ScottishPower, obviously, look, we're really proud and feel it's really important for us to play a massive part in that decarbonisation track. We've done a lot already. We've shut down all of Scotland's coal plant. We've been building wind farms, investing in the network, building renewables projects, looking at battery storage, and all the way through that, the creation of jobs and the creation of supply chain to help that just transition and to help level up the economy as well. Our view as a company is COP26 is now a great opportunity to not just demonstrate the success we've had, but to accelerate the next wave and the next part of the transition. And in particular, you're hearing people now talk a lot and in a lot more detail about the use of green hydrogen, and that's a great way for shifting the focus in terms of decarbonisation industrial process. And that's looking like a reality and a great way forward, as well as the electrification and the rollout of electric transport and the electrification and decarbonisation of the heating system as well. We think we've got a huge part to play in all of that as a company and as part of the Iberdrola Group. Last week, as a group, we announced over the next 5 years we're going to invest 75 billion euros globally. So a huge sum of money, and all of that investment is driven towards hitting net zero in all of the countries we operate in. It's about driving forward with the energy transition and driving forward with the push on renewables. In the UK, £10 billion of investment in the period to 2025 is a great way of, we believe, of kickstarting the road to net zero, and just as importantly right now is kickstarting that green economic recovery, which is so critical now, given where the economy is and given what's happened to youngsters coming out of school, coming out of college and university. We're very clear on where the money's going in terms of the delivery of projects and the delivery of significant change in terms of the network and the rollout of projects to help tackle net zero. The plans are based on ambition, they're based on innovation, and based on fundamentally doubling the amount of clean energy we currently produce. And it's that scale up that we need to see and we need to see required. I mean, I think often people think 2050 is a long time away. It's taken us 25 years to get to where we are in renewables. And our view as a company, in the next 5 years, we need to double it. And then in the 5 years after, we need to double it again and keep that kind of exponential growth. That is absolutely critical if we want to hit net zero. And it's those big investments and planning for those investments that will unlock net zero and allow us to hit the milestones of 2030, 2045, and then ultimately 2050 right across the whole of the country. Big thing and a big opportunity and something that's critical for the success of all of this is collaboration. And we absolutely have to see that driven right across the private sector, the public sector, the voluntary sector, every stakeholder group, all of us working together, all of us acting together to deliver the changes we need and the drive we need. And certainly as a leader of a business in Glasgow, I'm also fully aware that companies like us will be subject to much more scrutiny about who we are, how we behave and what we do, and just how committed are we to net zero. It's fine for us to be building wind farms, it's fine for us to be investing in the network, but it's also about our behaviour and the way we act as a business and as citizens of the city and the country as well, and all the way into our local communities. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be hosting an event in partnership with WWF Scotland. And again, the whole purpose of that event is bringing companies and other bodies together to talk about how we can work together and what we can do together in the next year in the run up to COP. And that's about combining skills, resources, expertise, and making sure that we achieve as much as we can in the following year to ensure that COP26 is a huge success. And we are really, really genuinely keen to work right across with everybody across the city of Glasgow and beyond, right across the whole country, to make COP26 a resounding success and bringing communities along with us on that journey so that we create a lasting legacy that's not just based around the city, but spreads out across every community across the whole of Scotland as well. And that benefit then lasts for many generations to come. And that's enough from me, I think. Thank you.
Keith, thank you very much. Just about bang on time for us, and we appreciate that. I think you've emphasised collaboration is key, innovation, policy commitments, and providing a basis for investment. Of course, the investment will need to come from public and private sector engagement. And of course, you have some great academics on the programme here today. We'll be talking about research and their inputs. And last but not least, I think you and Mary and Susan emphasised this, citizens engagement, absolutely pivotal. So Allister, on behalf of the group that I've just convened, thank you very much. Some spectacular contributions. I think it sets the scene nicely for the next sessions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Thanks to all the speakers, including Jim, for a fantastic session. I found all of the contributions quite inspirational there. And we look forward to working with all the organisations that have been represented to take these things forward. Now we're about to move on to the next session, which is where we've heard a lot about GEMM, and this is the session where we'll hear about GEMM in a bit more detail. And I'm going to pass over to Claire, who will give us some housekeeping reminders, and then I'll introduce the two speakers in the next session.
Thanks, Allister. Just very quickly, just to reiterate, for those who have just joined us, the event is being run as a Zoom webinar. The joining link you received is valid for the whole programme, so you don't need to jump about. We are recording the event and it will be made publicly available afterwards. If you have any questions for the speakers, please submit these using the Q&A function, and we will answer as many of these during the roundtable later today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. So the OSA and the AGU have been very great supporters of the GEMM project, and I'm glad to say that we now have two speakers representing the Optical Society and the American Geophysical Union. The first of our speakers is Tom Baer, who's been mentioned a couple of times already. He's the Executive Director of the Stanford Photonics Research Centre, and he's a consulting professor in the Applied Physics department there, and an associate member of the Stem Cell Institute at Stanford. He served as the president of the OSA in 2009, and Tom chairs the GEMM International Steering Committee. So Tom, we're looking forward to hearing your comments, remarks.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Allister, and welcome everybody. Today's event is the result of an ongoing collaboration between the City of Glasgow, the University of Strathclyde, the University of California at Berkeley, and Stanford University. This collaboration was organized by the Global Environmental Measurement and Monitoring Initiative, which is sponsored by two major international scientific societies, the Optical Society and the American Geophysical Union. The GEMM initiative builds on the complementary strengths of these two scientific societies. Members of these societies represent leading scientists and engineers throughout the world who are actively developing new approaches for measuring and modeling the ongoing changes to our environment. A major GEMM initiative goal is to provide this information to regional governments so they can make the most effective evidence-based policy decisions to deal with the impacts of environmental change in their regions. We are accomplishing this goal by organizing GEMM Centers of Excellence, designed to provide a focal point to convene the primary stakeholders. These stakeholders include the scientists and engineers developing new measurement technologies, climate scientists developing new, more accurate climate models, international standards organizations, government officials, and several other groups. We have established GEMM centers in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand. We are in discussions with universities and governments in many areas around the world to explore establishing additional GEMM centers. Over the past 3 years, we have organized a number of international meetings at these centers and have engaged with local government officials to define measurement programs which will provide critical information on the impacts of climate change, specifically relevant to their regions. The COP26 preview event is a primary example of the types of programs that the OSA and AGU are supporting through the GEMM program. Although today we are focusing on the impact of climate change on cities, here's a list of some of the other ongoing GEMM Center activities looking at other important aspects of climate change. I encourage all of you to take advantage of the presence of the scientific and government experts who are contributing to this webinar. Ask questions, consider the possibility of participating in the GEMM program. A primary focus of the GEMM initiative is to help your city deal with the challenges of meeting your goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and alleviating the health impacts of air pollution. Please contact us if you would like to participate in this program. On behalf of the Optical Society and the American Geophysical Union, I would like to thank the City of Glasgow and the University of Strathclyde for hosting this event, and all of you for taking the time to attend this webinar. And now Allister Ferguson will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Tom. For people who are watching us at home or wherever, please submit questions through the Q&A facility, and we will try to answer those questions in the round table. And if we can't answer them at the round table, we'll try and answer them later on in some other means. So Tom will actually be monitoring these questions through the day, and then I'll be posing them to the panel later today. So our next speaker is Guy Brasseur. Guy is a senior scientist and head of environment modeling group at Max Planck Institute for Meteorology in Hamburg. He researches in climate change, stratospheric ozone, global air pollution, and solar terrestrial interactions. He is a member of the council leadership team of the AGU. So welcome, Guy.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and welcome to all the listener. I'm representing the American Geophysical Union today, and of course we're really pleased to participate in the event that you are organizing today. Just a quick word about the American Geophysical Union. AGU is a community of Earth and space scientists, and it's dedicated really today more and more to discovery, of course, fundamental science, but also to solution to societal challenges. So AGU was founded in 1919, so it's more than 100 years old now. It has 62,000 members dispersed in 144 countries in the world. One of the big activities of AGU is to publish peer-reviewed journals, books on fundamental science, but also on frontier science in issues that are at the frontier with other disciplines. And so we are, of course, having each year our large AGU fall meeting, usually in San Francisco with 25,000 participants. This year, of course, it will be essentially a virtual meeting. This graph here shows you basically the different disciplines that we are covering, going from atmospheric science to global environmental changes, talking about biogeoscience, geohealth, but also planetary science, etc., etc. It's a really large community. Now, AGU, of course, is very interested in climate-related issue, but also in air pollution, air quality issue. And so our different sections can work together, converge on issue of that nature, developing a number of programs that can be very much fundamental, but also going into issue like policy and diplomacy, and bringing a number of initiatives together. And as we're talking about air quality in particular, we should see how much this community, how much progress this community has been doing over years. This is now a map here from space of nitrogen oxides globally, and you see that satellite now detects cities, detects roads, detects a lot of what's happening on Earth through these kind of observations. This is complemented by a lot of surface measurements that are used in particular in the urban context. And I'm showing you here basically how now more and more this community is addressing the problem in an integrative way, connecting essentially economic sectors with emissions, with air quality levels, with greenhouse gas, forcing in order to attribute really through kind of an inverse approach the sources of these gases, and to try to deliver policy advices in order to reduce emissions. Now, I'd like to show this slide here because it seems to me that we as scientists, and AGU is very much interested in that aspect, we have to create the missing part of the bridge that's relayed essentially the scientific community or the community that's involved in technological development to the needs of society. And this can be public services, city government, private cooperation. This is the bridge of Avignon in the south of France, which was never completed. And this is perhaps what we need to do today, is complete this kind of bridge to better relate the scientific world and the economic or political or public decision kind of world. And we do that more and more. This is here an example of an activity that, for example, looks at cities from the point of view of its infrastructure in the, let's say, transformed world to address climate change. And so you see now a number of scientific organizations or climate services that produce information that are directly relevant, for example, for city. In this case, highlighting, for example, the question of water in the city, but it could be many other aspects that are related. So I would like to say that we are very happy to be part of this group. AGU would like really to collaborate and bring the science that we can bring to the table and to make them available through a dialogue, the dialogue that I highlighted through this bridge with a number of decision makers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Guy, and thank you also to Tom. That concludes this session, and I'm going to pass back again to Claire, who will give us some housekeeping comments before we move on to a break and the next session.
Thanks, Allister. Yep, just a slightly shorter break than planned. So 10 minutes, we'll have a short break, and the next session will begin at 5:25 p.m. That's Greenwich Mean Time. Do not need to change meetings. It'll all be on the same webinar, and we will see you again soon.